Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rocket Top Insider Press Pass podcast, a Friday, January 31st edition. Last pod in January, of course, here in the year of 2025. I'm your host, Jack Foster, joined alongside Ric Butler and Ryan Schumpert, as always. Ryan, how you doing on this great Friday here in Knoxville?
I'm doing well. Excited to be back on here talking mostly some Tennessee basketball stuff, but also getting into a little bit of Tennessee football. As it feels like we've made it through the first part of the offseason. And it's funny, the first part of the offseason starts before the season's actually over. First part of the offseason feels like, starts in December when the transfer portal opens, but it kind of feels like we've made it through that. And now it would be a pretty quiet part of the offseason until they get going in spring practice here in a number of weeks, I guess.
Yeah, Ric, we were talking about it a little bit last night over text, but, there's hardly ever an off season with football, like whether it's NFL or obviously with what we do in Tennessee football, because it is king. So there's always going to be content you're getting out. But if there is a certain point where the off season really feels like the off season, it's late January and it's the month of February. So we are in that stretch right now.
Yeah, I think you're talking about a couple different things when you just talk about what people are talking about when it comes to the sport of college football. I mean, you're right. There are times where people will kind of create the talking points and we talk about projections and we talk about lists and we talk about rankings and all that kind of stuff. But that naturally, there's ebbs and flows to it. And right now is certainly one of those times where you've gotten out a lot of lists, you've gotten out a lot of charts. There's just so much going on aside from the football world as well that, yeah, there's just going to be some natural ebbs and flows. So we're in kind of one of those stages right now. I know we're looking forward to spring football, getting our first glimpse of the 2025 Tennessee football team, especially after everything with the playoff run last year. But of course, there's naturally going to be some ebbs and flows. And when you're in a place like Knoxville and there's other talented teams who are going to be taking the spotlight, so to say, then yeah, I think that sort of adds into it as well. So it's fun to be here. Obviously, we got a little bit of college football to talk about today, but yeah, we're just kind of at that point in the season where there's a little bit less news to talk about than some other times.
Absolutely. And with that being said, we're going to have a little bit of fun today because why not? Ryan put out a depth chart projection yesterday, January 30th edition of a depth chart projection. So obviously it's really early before spring ball. It's very difficult to truly assess some of these position battles, but hey, this is what the offseason is about. It's about speculating and projecting. So we're going to get into that depth chart projection. But first, since we last got on here, Sam Pendleton did commit to Tennessee football. We talked about the visit last week and how it was, obviously looking positive that Sam was going to commit to Tennessee. He did indeed. So this is a big get for the Vols. Notre Dame transfer offensive lineman. He's got some eligibility left, redshirt sophomore. So, going to be, can be on at Tennessee for a couple of seasons. This is great news, Ryan, for the Tennessee offensive line that is obviously having to retool a bit going into 2025.
Certainly. A big need, and you saw Tennessee swing and miss with a handful of prospects. I think the Thompson kid from Northwestern who ended up going to LSU, he visited Tennessee, and then I think it was Emmanuel Prognon, maybe mispronouncing his name, but a starter at USC, a guard who had visited Tennessee and ended up going to Oregon. So you've seen for a while, Tennessee was trying to add another interior offensive lineman to its roster and through the transfer portal, and they end up landing one. And I think it could be really, really important that they landed one. The big question mark, I think, still from Tennessee's roster at this point is what the situation is with Andrej Karic. The NCAA still hasn't said anything about whether he will be awarded another year of eligibility with his waiver or his claim. So I think that's kind of the thing that if he gets eligibility, I think that makes things a little more interesting about who fits where on the offensive line. If he's not eligible, I think it's pretty simple. Pendleton plays left guard. He started 6 games. I think it was his first 6 games for Notre Dame there last year. For some guys got healthy and he got bumped out of the starting lineup. If Karic is back, then I think it becomes interesting of like, all right, Pendleton can play a little bit of center. Does Pendleton start at center? What does the competition with Pendleton and Bryson Lang look like? What would a competition at left guard with Karic and Pendleton look like? So that would throw – I mean, obviously it'd be good for Tennessee if Karic got his eligibility. But that would make things a little messier, and it'd be a little more interesting to see where all the puzzle pieces fit. But no doubt Tennessee needs depth, and they need quality players there. And like you said, Jack, I think you hit on one of, to me, the biggest wins is that he has multiple years of eligibility, because it just feels like Tennessee is absolutely living in the portal to put together an offensive line right now. And so having someone they can try to develop and have be a potential starter for a handful of years, I think is a huge plus.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think about, Rick, that if Carrick were to come back, I think the most likely scenario for the Tennessee offensive line, of course, it would be a lot of competition, but there could be 4 transfers on the Tennessee offensive line starting if Carrick were to come back. 2 of them returning players, and Hurd and Carrick, but you have Wendell Moe and Sam Pendleton. We could see a scenario where there's 4 non-Hypo LRB recruits starting on the offensive line here in 2025.
Yeah, and then I guess in that situation, the 5th one, the right tackle over on the right side of the line would be a true freshman, right? So
right.
you would be dealing with quite a unique offensive line. But I think Ryan hit a lot of the good points about this. The biggest things that Tennessee needed was quality players and depth, and I think Sam Pendleton, thank you. I think he really helps check some of those boxes for Tennessee. And like Ryan said, I like the versatility. I like that he can do a couple of different things on the offensive line, but I also like where he came from. I think there's no doubt that you can't look at a guy and say, hey, you're at a program like Notre Dame. You bounced around a little bit just in terms of that offensive line getting moved around basically for this injury concern or that player returning or whatever it might be. But, you go through a college football playoffs. You go through those great moments and also those low moments of what sort of that journey is. So I like that Tennessee brought in I like where he's coming from. I like what he adds to Tennessee. And yeah, we'll see how everything kind of shakes out in the spring. Obviously, having this conversation on January 31st, it's kind of like the Star Thomas situation. We said, look, we don't know where he's going to fit in Tennessee's backfield yet, but we know that we like him being there. I think that's especially true with Sam Pendleton as well. Just sort of, hey, where's he going to fill in? We'll kind of find out as the spring goes along, certainly as the summer and the training camp comes up as well. But I like what Tennessee is doing here at this spot. And obviously that is an important player to get. You look at what Wendell Moe Jr. brings to the table. You round that out with Sam Pendleton. And I think that's a great way for Tennessee to sort of revitalize that offensive line position that did see a lot of turnover in the offseason.
A definite need in the portal that was acknowledged by Tennessee and obviously visited. And with 2 incoming transfers, it's definitely the outlook is better now for the Tennessee offensive line heading into the fall. Let's transition to looking at this depth chart projection from Ryan himself yesterday. I want to start with the offensive line. We've been talking about it, so we might as well put this conversation to bed a bit here. Looking at Ryan's projection, this is without Andre Carrick coming back. So the projection as it stands right now is Lance Hurd at left tackle. I think we all feel good about that. Sam Pendleton at left guard, William Satterwhite at center, Wendell Moe at right guard, and David Sanders at right tackle. Ryan, I would assume you feel pretty confident in 4 of these, but the center position will have competition. Why did you choose William Satterwhite for your projected starter at center, and how confident do you feel in that?
Well, I think it just goes back to what we're just talking about. If Karras doesn't get eligibility and you don't have him there, then I feel very confident that William Satterwhite's going to be a starter. I mean, Vyson Lang would have been the only other person that you would have said was in competition with him, and he transferred out this offseason. I think ends up landing at Troy. So definitely confident in the sense that if Andrej Karic isn't back, that he will be that guy. To me, it's kind of a no-brainer at that point. If he is back, I think becomes how the left guard and center works out with those 3 players. I think it becomes very, very interesting. So, I do think David Sanders will be the starter at right tackle. I wonder if a Bennett Warren or somebody else, Brian Grant, who's been in the program a couple of years longer, pushes there. I think that would be interesting. But as a whole, the offensive line, I think, is pretty stabilized. And I don't know. It's just, not to be too negative, but I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous that this is the state of the offensive line in Josh Heupel's 5th year, that you got to have they cannot recruit a single player and develop them from the high school ranks and have them ready to start. I mean that. So we're entering year 5, and there is, they're going to have their first one, and there is a real chance if Karich comes back that it'll just be one. It won't even be 2. And that's pretty crazy, especially when you consider it's a freak David Sanders, 5 stars, top 5 player in the country. It's not like somebody they brought in and then developed, and it was like, all right, you got this guy who's good to play now 3 years in, like it typically is for an offensive line. It's possibly taking an extraordinary talent to do that. I think that's high school recruiting and development at offensive line and receiver. I think there are a few spots you can dock this staff or criticize this staff more than at those 2 spots, because offensive line especially, I think it's pretty ridiculous that they're in this spot in year 5.
Yeah, and it's not that Tennessee just hasn't recruited a lot of offensive linemen in the Heupel era. There's been a bunch of guys, granted not high-end recruits, but there's been a lot of bodies that Tennessee has gotten along the offensive line in these recruiting classes. It's just none of them seen the field, or the light of day, and then they transfer out, and that was that. And Tennessee rode a lot of the upperclassmen that were here when the Heupel regime came in 2021 until now. The Dane Davises, the Lampleys, all these guys that were pretty old, Ollie Lanes, and now all those guys have obviously run out of eligibility or moved on, and you gotta. This is the year where you're really seeing just a complete reset, but you would hope from the fan perspective and of course on the coaching staff that it wouldn't have to be this major, that those guys that you'd obviously recruited in 22, 23, 24 can develop enough to be trusted, but just doesn't seem like that's the case.
Yeah, it's not like a Derek Dooley situation where they're just not recruiting offensive linemen. They're not like inept in understanding how it works. They've signed a bunch of offensive linemen early in most classes. And I will say, I think the class that was just freshmen with Satterwhite and with Bennett Warren, there's some reason for optimism with those guys. And you're obviously asking more of them in year 2. That's a tough ask for offensive linemen in your second year to be starters. Not that it's impossible, but it's just the execution there has not been at the level it needs to be.
Looking across the offense here on your depth chart projection, quarterback we don't have to get into. Mark Linger was your backup quarterback. I think that's very likely. But wide receiver, we'll hit on this first. Mike Matthews and Brazel out wide, Braylon Staley in the slot. Was there much thought put into this receiver projection? Talk about a position group with a lot of turnover and new faces getting more playing time in 25. It will be the wide receiver group. So what was your thought process going into this wide receiver projection?
I think it's pretty simple in terms of putting it together on January 21st or January 29th, 30th, whenever it was that I did it. Because it's just kind of like the guys that are back. You put in those starting spots. Tennessee didn't go out in the transfer portal and sign anybody that you're like, that's a no doubt starter. They didn't in high school ranks grab anybody that's a no doubt starter. So I think when you're putting it together at this point before anyone even hits the practice field, it's pretty simple. I would not be surprised a ton if it changes. Maybe Amari Jefferson, transfer from Alabama, or Travis Smith goes out and claims a spot. But at this point, I thought it was pretty simple. The one that's interesting is I got Boo Carter as the backup in the slot. Obviously, that was the big talking point as he comes back to Tennessee for a sophomore year of wanting to play offense. Just what does that look like? How many snaps will he play on offense compared to defense? How would they want to balance his time at those spots? Where do they see as a more pressing need? Do they feel like he can play slot receiver at a really high level? All those questions that we don't really know the answer to right now. But it feels like there's a wide range of what the answer could be. And obviously that would shake up what the receiver room would look like as well. Kitzelman,
starting tight end. That's a slam dunk. And then at the running back position, we talked about it last week. We don't have to get into it again. But, it's a three-headed – we'll see if it's a monster, but it's a three-headed backfield here with Deshaun Bishop, Star Thomas, Peyton Lewis. You have Bishop listed first. Obviously showed flashes of being really solid in 2024. Star Thomas, the newcomer, the upperclassman here. Peyton Lewis entering his true sophomore season. So I don't think you necessarily put a lot of thought into who's won here, because we know that all three of these guys are going to get a crack at a lot of playing time early in the season. And it'll just be who can take the reins and become potentially the lead back here amongst these three.
Yeah, it felt like a guessing game. It felt like any three of those guys could be in any order. And, it's almost one of those things where I think any person I would have had third, I was like, I don't really like the fact that I have him third. I don't know, Rick, what you would place as your order at this point, but that one was probably as difficult as any position to estimate what it could look like 1 to 3.
I think as far as projection goes, I think you got it right. I mean, there's no sense in my mind to be going away from Deshaun Bishop at the 1 slot. I don't think that was probably an argument in your head. We'll see what happens with Star Thomas. It's kind of like the wide receivers that you just talked about. When you have guys who have been at the program versus guys who aren't necessarily top 10 transfer portal type players, you bring them into the program. It's like, yeah, they're probably going to be competing for a starting spot, but you just don't know where they're going to be in that process quite yet. So I think it is fair to give Star Thomas the nod above Peyton Lewis, just because Peyton Lewis was that, hey, we're going to bring you along. Obviously, the injury to Deshaun Bishop, elevated his status with the program last year, but he also showed you some really impressive things, and he showed you that he can be an SEC-type running back. So I like what you have right there. I think you've got it right. I think Deshaun Bishop kind of earns the starting nod going into the spring just because of his returning status. And I think that you give Star Thomas a lot of that, oh boy, wait and see kind of just what could happen. What is the ceiling going to be for Star Thomas in the Tennessee running back room? And then I think you slip in the true sophomore Peyton Lewis right in after that as well. So I think you got it right. Is there anything I expect to change or think could possibly change? Well, we'll see how Star Thomas does. Again, he's kind of that revolving piece. Could he move up a little bit if he really shows good athleticism and shows that he knows what he's doing? I don't know. I really think they do like Deshaun Bishop, but yeah, I see Tennessee moving into kind of that 3-headed monster range for the running back room as well. So I like what you did, Bishop, Thomas, Lewis. Again, it's January 31st, right? We'll kind of see how that Star Thomas piece folds into the mix.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's like Ryan said, it's a guessing game, but there's two guys there that are young that showed capability to handle a workload last year in Bishop and Lewis, and then Thomas had a solid season at Duke, so we'll see how that works out for Tennessee. Moving on to the defense, looking at the defensive line. On the edges, return Dominique Bailey, Tyree West, really good players. Josh Joseph's at the Leo position. And then, some Caleb Herring, not necessarily young anymore, but, we haven't seen as much from Caleb Herring as we would expect to see, this year moving down the line. And then Jordan Ross, an intriguing player entering his sophomore season. So there's a lot of potential at the edge position for Tennessee. With those two, you have Joseph's listed first at the Leo. I think we'd all agree with that. And then Dom Bailey, leader along this defensive line on the other side. The defensive tackle position is what I'm curious to get you guys' thoughts on. Bryson Eason returns. We know he's going to contribute. Jackson Moy had a really solid 2024 campaign. David Hobbs is listed as your other starting defensive tackle. He showed some flashes as well last season. So I'm just curious your thought process with this defensive tackle ranking you have here on your depth chart and the position as a whole, because there is quite a bit of turnover here as well.
Definitely. I mean, I think looking at it, it was kind of like, all right, this is a bigger concern than I think it was in my head. Because we early in the transfer portal cycle, like we heard Tennessee, I think, hosted a couple of defensive tackles on visits. We're talking to defensive tackles. It felt like an area of need. And then when the receiver room, probably over half the receiver room, entered the transfer portal, it kind of lost its feel or its significance a little bit. But then you look at it, and I'm kind of like, yeah, I think they kind of desperately need another body at defensive tackle. They're super thin there right now. I guess my curiosity would be is like, do you almost try? They're very, very deep at both Leo and defensive end. Do you try to slide a defensive end, a bigger one, a Tyree West, Tyree Weathersby over to defensive tackle and play them there a little bit, some for depth? I don't know, because to me it feels like you got three guys you feel pretty good about right now, and Bryson Eason is definitely a starter. I think like you said, I listed Hobbs as the starter over Moy. I think you could have those two in either order. They're both going to play a ton of snaps for Tennessee.
Yeah.
But after those three, to me, it's a very, very large drop-off. And really nobody else that has played any significant number of snaps for Tennessee.
Yeah, and one thing that we learned, maybe not learned, but was certainly reiterated last year was that this Rodney Garner defensive line unit can really play well when they are able to use that depth to their advantage, when they are able to keep those fresh lungs over what their opponent offensive line has. And I think you look at these three positions, tackle, and end, and you say, hey, Tennessee fans are probably familiar with, I don't know, 5 out of the 6 on the 2 deep. But then after that, you start moving into some names that aren't as familiar. And I'm not saying that if your name's not familiar, you don't have promise on the football field, but I'm saying that that's just kind of where Tennessee has been. Those guys haven't necessarily been in the rotation as much. They're low experience. I don't want to say low experience, but just less experienced type players. We'll see what they can add for this Tennessee offensive line. But I think you're right. This Tennessee line has really taken advantage of depth and recent games and just recent stretches. I don't know if they have that again right now as we move into it. One thing that I do really like from Tennessee, though, is I really like the progression of David Hobbs. I think that he's going to be a standout player for Tennessee on that line. You've seen some standout players in the past in the last couple of years, and I think that David Hobbs is going to kind of thrust himself into that position for Tennessee this year. I'm high on what he brings to the table early on in the year. But otherwise, you're looking at that depth, that calling card of Tennessee's D-line last year, and I just don't know if it's there the same way, but we'll see how some of these guys progress here in the next couple months.
Well, it's not just less depth too, but it's like, they played the 6 guys defensive tackle last year pretty extensively. If I'm ranking, and again, and it's not an exact science or anything, but like roughly speaking, it's probably like their 3rd, 5th, and 6th best defense tackles that are back. So it's not like
Right,
it's
yeah.
Omar Norman Lott and Amari Thomas and guys that you say, all right, you might have to play these guys more reps, but like you feel pretty good about, all right, yeah, if you got to play them 40, 50 reps a game, like it's not ideal, but you feel like they can probably hold up at a pretty high level. Which isn't the same way, and Hobbs can't. Like they were younger guys, so naturally they had played a little bit, they had less experience. But there's just more uncertainty there. Easton, I would say, is a guy you feel like could play that number of reps. Not that he's just going to be a game changer,
Sure.
but he's played a ton of snaps for Tennessee and has been very solid. So I think that's kind of the other thing that adds a little bit of intrigue or maybe a little bit of a question mark to that room.
Looking at the linebacker position, 2 returners here that started last year because of injury and, obviously played a ton. Arian Carter, Jeremiah T-Lander. My question for you, Ryan, is do you think Edwin Spillman could push for more playing time in 2025? If, Arian Carter is going to be the leader of this room, but do you think Spillman could potentially push T-Lander for some more playing time? We know he's going to get snaps anyways, but do you think Edwin Spillman could, have not close to a breakout season for Tennessee this fall?
For sure. I mean, I think that's definitely in play. I think that's probably, to me, one of the biggest reasons of optimism for that room is hope that Edwin Spillman can become a kind of next level guy. Not to say T-Lander and Carter can't get better, so I think they certainly can. They've mainly just had one major year of experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see like a major jump forward for either of those guys, especially T-Lander coming. I guess Carter wouldn't shock me. And Spillman, I mean, I thought he was impressive when he did play. I mean, I think it probably said a lot both about his skill set and about just how much William Inge wants to rotate that he was out basically the entirety of the season. And then he got back against Vanderbilt and Tennessee's down and they're playing to try to make the college football playoff. And he got a good bit of run in that game. So I think Tennessee staff's high on him. I think he's a really, really talented player. And he's probably the most intriguing guy in Tennessee's linebacker room, if not one of the most intriguing players on its defense as a whole as we go into 25.
Yeah, it's a good call. And there's a lot of youth after those 3, with Christian Gass, Jordan Burns, who's entering a redshirt freshman season, Jaden Harmon. So it feels like Tennessee won't put a lot of trust in those guys, to have significant playing time. So it's really going to be these 3. And Edwin Spillman, I think you hit the nail on the head, is one of the more intriguing players along on this Tennessee defense. I put David Hobbs up there as well. Just guys who can potentially take a big leap and come out of nowhere in a way to become a really big contributor.
Yeah, I think I would almost push back on the not that those guys can make a big jump claim, but like those three guys mainly. I mean, we just saw Inge play so many guys last year that I think it's going to be a big rotation again. Certainly, those are, I think, clear cut the top three, and you will see a difference in reps. I wonder if Jordan Burns grabs that like third down package type guy. I mean, he has a much more slender frame than anybody else in that room. And Caleb Perry and Jalen Smith, who had those roles last year and in years past, are obviously gone. They transferred. And then I think Harmon and I think Gass are really talented players too. I think two of the more intriguing guys in Tennessee signing class. So not that it's just like a given that they'll earn playing time, but when you combine that fact with the fact that Inge, I think, is more prone to play young guys than especially the rest of Tennessee's defensive staff, I definitely think you could see those guys get a good bit of playing time and not just be like a three-man rotation with a massive drop-off of a couple snaps a game after that.
It's wild that Arian Carter and Jeremiah Thielander are moving into their third year with the program. They just seem like two of those guys who I specifically remember from the recruiting trail. I specifically remember Arian Carter's his commitment to Tennessee, which was a big one late in the cycle. And I remember Jeremiah Thielander, making some plays during his freshman season. So I think Ryan made a ton of good points about just the personnel and who's going to be playing where and who's going to be playing what. And, William Inge and what he's going to do. But I was just sitting there that whole time thinking, golly, it's crazy that those two guys are heading into their third year of the program just because they feel like guys we were just talking about from the recruiting trail, just, in a recent memory. So I like what Ryan said. I think you guys are right. There's opportunity afoot. You got two juniors who are kind of leading the room as the older guys, but we know what Inge from this past season. We know that he's going to like to do some rotations. He's going to like to get some fresh legs out there. I think certainly Edwin Spillman is a big player that he likes. I mean, what was it? It was that Ohio State game, right, where he came out with just that big old club, on his hand or whatever it was, right? So, when you're sending somebody out there with a club, I think you've got some faith and you've got some trust in what they do and what they bring to the table. So I absolutely see Edwin Spillman being a factored in player, even if he's not starting. I still see him having a big role for that Tennessee defense. And then again, man, just a lot of opportunity for guys like Christian Gass, Jordan Burns, Jaden Harmon, the other freshman or second-year players who are going to be in the program, who can step up, who can go grab the brass ring. I guess that's one of the storylines that we will follow over the next 5 to 6 months.
Wrapping up with the secondary here, a little bit, more, it's a little bit easier here as there's a ton of returners on the secondary, ton of returning starters. You look at the cornerback position, it's pretty clear. Jermod McCoy, Ricky Gibson, assuming McCoy will be fine to go for the start of the season as he recovers from a torn ACL. At the safety spot, Andre Turntine, Jacoby Thomas, and then at the star position, Boo Carter. But the kicker here to me, Ryan, for the whole secondary, really looking at the safety positions, is can Jordan Thomas become a significant factor into all this in 2025? Returning from injury, was a projected starter last year at the star position. He's obviously not necessarily just a star. He can play the other safety spots too. And there wasn't, always 10 out of 10 play, obviously, from Tennessee's safeties last year. So do you think Jordan Thomas could work his way into some significant playing time returning from injury here this season?
Definitely think so. I would agree with you that he's kind of the X factor in the back end of Tennessee's secondary of like where he fits in, what that looks like. And yeah, like you said, it's not like Tennessee's safety play was just phenomenal last season and Will Brooks was the best one and he's gone. So there's opportunity at either of the safety spots for him to earn a starting spot or more playing time. We also go back to the Boo Carter debate. Thomas, like you said, he was going to be the starter at Star last year before he tore his ACL in fall camp. Boo Carter going to play some on offense. How does that all work out? Does that lead to maybe Jordan Thomas starting at that same spot again and Boo Carter playing there some, but playing more on offense? Like all that to me is just a big question right now. And I guess the last guy that I would add just as an X factor in the back end is Edries Farouk. I had him as a backup at one of the safety spots. I thought he flashed in times last year as a true freshman. Does he earn some playing time? I think he'll push for playing time. I don't know if it's necessarily a starting spot, but I think he'll end up being in the rotation in the back end. And he's, again, Thomas, it feels like it's more of a given that he's going to be somewhere. So it's kind of like, where does he fit into the puzzle? And maybe not a true X factor. I think Farouk is maybe more of the true X factor as to where, all right, he might not play, but if he has a good offseason and he really asserts himself, like, I think he could change the outlook and really kind of shuffle the deck, I guess, in what Tennessee's safety rotation looks like.
Guys, I see personally one big problem with the secondary, and that's that you've got a Jacoby Thomas and a Jordan Thomas. That's going to really I'm going to really verbally fumble that one a lot over the next year or so. Talking about a Jordan Thomas, accidentally referring to a Jacoby Thomas, and they're going to be playing pretty much close to each other in that safety secondary level. So that's my big problem with the Tennessee secondary, with the Tennessee defensive backs heading into the training camp. You got two names extremely similar, same initials, same last name, same number, almost the same number of letters in their first name. But aside from that, I think that Ryan's right. You look at Jordan Thomas, and that was a big blow for Tennessee's secondary last year. I know that definitely scared a lot of Tennessee fans, as it, rightfully should have back there during the offseason before going into the 2024 season. But one thing that I think he does have to his advantage is it's not like a player moving to a new school. It's not like a player trying to get acclimated to a new coaching staff. This is a guy who's been here for 3 years now, who understands who his teammates are, and most importantly, understands not just the Tim Banks defense, but the Willie Martinez secondary room as well. So I do think that he's going to have some of those factors that are going for him as he tries to get back to the field. It seems that, I don't know this for sure, but I guess just based on the natural injury timeline, it seems like he'll be with Tennessee during these spring workouts, certainly the summer workouts, and then leading into training camp next year, I believe. And so I think that's going to be enough time for him to get reacclimated with the program, with his teammates, with just the on-field workouts. So I do have high expectations for Jordan Thomas. And again, Ryan's right. There, you do get to kind of the predicament of, okay, well, Boo Carter flashed his importance last year and his ability at the start position. So what is Tennessee going to do there? I don't know. I'm not the coach of the secondary, so that is not my job to figure out. But I am excited to see what they do with it, and I do have belief that Jordan Thomas, just with the different factors that are coming, that are coming to make up his return to the field, I think that those are advantageous ones. So I'm excited to see what Jordan Thomas can do. But we'll see. Obviously, Jamon McCoy's injury is a big storyline that we talked about a couple weeks ago. We know that Ricky Gibson is a very talented cornerback that's going to come back to the opposite side of him, but yeah, I mean, besides Will Brook, I think there's a ton of familiar names here who are going to be coming back to this Tennessee secondary. So we'll see what they can all do with another year, mostly together with these guys in the room.
All right, there you have it. January 30th, depth chart projection. Definitely going to be 100% correct. We can assure that.
Well, I missed a lot of oars, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I should have just listed
Ryan?
the entire roster with oars besides it, like quarterback and probably just quarterback. Maybe corner. Yeah, quarter and cornerback. The two spots I could have not just listed oars at every single.
Yeah.
With five different people.
Yeah. That's probably it, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. Tight end. Maybe, I mean, I was going to say tight end, but no. I think Miles Kitselman and Ethan Davis were co-starters there last year. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's probably legit it, which is
maybe
crazy.
linebacker. Maybe linebacker. Because I think that they would have their two juniors as solidified starters.
Yeah, I think
just
they might
kind
have
of give us
Spillman as an oar, though.
Yeah, I mean, Spillman could be an oar. That's true.
Nah.
It feels like Bryson Easton has to be listed as. Bryson Easton is so clearly going to be a starter at defensive tackle.
Yeah. What about Joshua Josephs? Does Caleb Herring sneak in
to
the oar there?
He's definitely an oar.
James Pierce was oared with Jordan Ross last year. Yeah, it's gonna be an oar at Leo. There's no doubt about that.
That's true. Yeah, maybe one of these different
Jordan
shows
Ross
will do who will be or who shouldn't be or, who will be but shouldn't be.
Do we have a guess at how many snaps Jordan Ross played last year?
Oh, I don't have a good one.
31.
No, I was actually going to say 35. So
okay,
you can take the over. I'll take
20.
the under on 31.
Oh, there you go.
20, only 20, really. I would have thought 10 more got added in.
Yeah, I mean, that's just defensive snaps too.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sure he played.
Yeah, that's what I was going off of.
Special team snaps.
Sure.
James Pierce entered the season projected as a top 5 pick, and Jordan Ross played 20 defensive snaps over the course of the season, and they were listed as co-starters on the depth chart all year.
Yeah, they wanted to throw UTC off their give him a tough scout. You don't know who you're going to see at that spot. Will it be Jordan Ross? Will it be James Pierce? I mean, UTC had Tennessee hung up 60 points on them for a reason, and didn't let up very many. Yeah, they got him. They got him good. So they had no idea what was coming. Yeah, they had no idea. They were preparing for Jordan Ross. They got a dose of James Pierce. That's chess right there.
Chess, not checkers. All right, let's move on to
that was the Ole Miss football tagline in 2021 when they came to Knoxville to play. I remember that very vividly. They put out a graphic that said chess, not checkers.
I think A&M did the same thing in 23 too.
I think they might have as well. Yeah. Yep.
All right, let's move on to some hoops talk. It's obviously in the major part of the season, big part of the season here in SEC play. We're deep into it. Tennessee, though, has lost 3 of its last 4 games, has dropped 2 straight on the road at Auburn last Saturday, and then a tough one at home against Kentucky on Tuesday night. So many chances to take the lead late and to spark things, but the shots just weren't falling, and it was a tough watch for Tennessee there, shooting the ball late against Kentucky, lose 78-73. Of course, the Auburn game was the rock fight. Everyone knows that game, 53-51. It was shades of a couple of years ago in TBA. Just the roles were reversed and who won the game. Tennessee gets a chance to get back on track. Has a chance to get back on track. Saturday afternoon in Knoxville against Florida, looking to exact revenge on the blowout loss in Gainesville earlier this season. I'll let these guys predominantly talk about this basketball conversations. They're on the beat, watching practice every week, doing everything covering Tennessee basketball for us over at RTI. But guys, it's a big one on Saturday against the Gators. Tennessee really needs this one to get back on track.
Ryan, I'll ask you this. You put out an article earlier in the week titled, "This was the most important week for Tennessee basketball of the regular season." With the loss to Kentucky at home on Tuesday, is this now the biggest crossroads point that Tennessee basketball has hit this season? Is this sort of like look, I'm never going to sit here and say this season that Tennessee has a bad basketball team. I think that's just unequivocally not true. But is this a point where things can either kind of get back on track or things could potentially spiral out a little bit? Tennessee's had 2 straight losses to ranked opponents, but they also have two straight ranked opponents on the horizon with Florida and Kentucky coming up. And then you have an Alabama and another Kentucky coming up just right on the other side of that. So is this kind of a point where, and again, I don't want to be too dramatic, I don't want to be too hyperbolic, but just kind of for lack of better words, is this kind of a sink or swim game coming up right here for Tennessee that could potentially change the trajectory of this season?
I don't think that's too dramatic at all. No, I mean, I think it's a huge game.
I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just look at it like not very little is going to be easy in SEC play this year, but you have an easier 2-game stretch after that. Missouri at home, who's a top 25 team, so obviously good, but not quite at the Florida, Auburn, Kentucky, Alabama level. And then you go to Oklahoma, which is going to be one of the easier road games on the schedule. A game they really need to win, even though it's on the road. So if you can find a way to beat Florida, I think there's a good chance you can win 3 straight before the return trip to Lexington on the 11th of February. So yeah, I think it's a huge game, and I think it's just like a stop the bleeding type game. Tennessee desperately needs to get a win for momentum's sake, for just the hyperbolic, or not hyperbolic, but the theoretical see one go down when it comes to a shooting situation. And certainly Tennessee needs to see some shots go down, but they just need to get a win in a big type of game. So I don't think that's dramatic at all. I think it would be a huge win and a game Tennessee needs to get.
Yeah, and one thing that I see with this team that they could really benefit from, it's just all around consistency. And I say that in a couple different ways, but like you had alluded to a second ago, just kind of that idea of seeing a shot fall, seeing a game win. I think that is big for this team, being able to get a little bit of consistency. Granted, the league conference does not bode well for consistency. I mean, it is always a grind, no matter if you're playing, one of the top 10 teams in the country, who's likely going to be an SEC team, or you're playing a team that's unranked and hungry, but they're sort of rising up those ranks. But I think that Tennessee just needs a little bit more consistency from the players as well. I mean, you look at Chaz Lanier, that game against Auburn, I believe it was. I think he had, I guess nobody scored who was the game that Lanier scored 23 against recently? Was that Mississippi State maybe last midweek?
Yeah,
I thought that
right.
might have been a turning point for him. But Tennessee struggled on the road. Then you come back home, and he struggled again at home a little bit. I think that Igor Milicic Jr., you saw how great he was against, who was that opponent? I'm blanking now.
He played great against
Tennessee.
Kentucky, and then
Yes.
in Arkansas as well. I mean, he's played good in a handful of games.
Yeah, but it's just the
Vanderbilt too.
consistency. Yeah, so I'd like to see Tennessee. I think they could really benefit some more from consistency. And again, I'm not necessarily pressing the panic button on this team. I like where they're at. I still think that they're a top 10, a top 15 team in the country for sure. But we got to see how they're going to respond to all this adversity coming up. Again, 2 straight losses, but the road doesn't get a lot easier. Like Ryan mentioned, yes, Missouri isn't maybe in that top tier of teams, but we're also talking about the SEC, that anything can pretty much happen on any given night. So what is Tennessee going to do to stop the bleeding? What are they going to do to get back on track? These are the big questions. But if you want to look at external factors, then you got a pretty good one for this weekend's game, because you're taking on a team. You're welcoming a team into your own house who's not only a rival for you, not only a rival for your fans, but they also beat your brains in by 30 points earlier in the season in their own building. So how is Tennessee just going to respond to A, that blowout loss against Florida, but B, these last 2 losses leading into this game as well? I do think that this is a really big one for Tennessee. You got it at noon on Saturday at Thompson-Boling Arena. But I do think this is a bit of a sink or swim. Again, not to say that if Tennessee loses this, just go ahead and throw the whole season in the trash. But I think that that's just going to be that much more of a tougher obstacle to overcome, rather than getting a win here over the weekend, being able to sort of avenge your worst loss this season and just give yourself a little bit of momentum heading into that Missouri game as well. But we'll see. This is going to be a huge one coming up on Saturday. That loss to Kentucky only magnified it. And we'll see what happens. I felt really good about Tennessee's chances at home until that Kentucky game, until they struggled a little bit in different aspects of that game. So we'll see. I'm not really sure what to make of this game yet, but I guess it's in just over 25 hours away as we say this here on the recording. So got to come up with a prediction, hopefully sometime here soon.
Couple of thoughts on the consistency note. I mean, I think you see two areas there. I mean, the 2 guys you noted are players that transferred from a low major in Chaz Lanier and a mid major in Igor Milicic. So I think there is a level of inconsistency that you'd expect from most of those guys that haven't been through it. And certainly the SEC being as good as it is this year, and every game being seemingly being a top 25 game and a lot of top 10 games on national television, like there is a difference to that, I think, and makes consistency hard. And then 2, just with the team as a whole, it goes back to what I wrote about. Like, this team was built to be a good 3-point shooting team. They don't have a ton of options, offensive rim threats. That was made all the worse when JP Estrella wasn't really able to play much at all this season and had the season-ending foot surgery. So when you're just dependent on being a 3-point shooting team, I think that leads itself to some consistency on its own. Now, Tennessee has been overly inconsistent shooting. They've shot the ball worse than they expected. They have to shoot the ball better. They can't have as much inconsistency as they've had there if they're going to be the offensive team they thought they could be, an offensive team they were early in the year. But I do think those 2 things lead to just naturally a little bit of inconsistency.
Sure. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. And We'll see. Again, that's not, that's just kind of evaluating what's been going on, and there are a lot of
Yeah,
external
for
factors
sure.
to it. But Tennessee's got to get a hold of this thing. It's just you're in a conference where there's just not a lot of time to be on a cold streak, and I think that's what you've seen a little bit here. Tennessee's got to figure out a way to kind of pull themselves up by their bootstraps, figure out what's going on, and be able to get a win. Again, Florida is a very challenging team coming up on Saturday, but they present one of those opportunities that could really sort of jumpstart your season back in the right direction. It's like Jack, I know you know what I'm talking about. It's like the Fast and the Furious movies when Vin Diesel, he starts untwisting the lever right here and the NOS gets into the engine and they just skyrocket down the track or down the street, whatever it is, or wherever they're at in Brazil. I don't know. It's sort of like that. Like I feel like beating a team like Florida can kind of be that NOS in the engine to really get you going in the right direction, to really get you up some speed. So this game against Saturday is a big one. We'll see if Tennessee either drops it to 3 or they make a big statement win in front of their home crowd in Knoxville. But all eyes are going to be on the Tennessee Volunteers to see just how they bounce back from these 2 top 12 losses.
Yeah, no, it's funny. You were mentioning ranked opponents earlier, and the SEC is just so insanely loaded this year. It might as well just say every game's a ranked matchup because the road trip to Oklahoma and LSU are, unranked opponents, but Oklahoma is, solid and was ranked before this season. And then the season finale against South Carolina is an unranked matchup right now as well. But like everything else is a ranked matchup. Missouri, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, Bama, A&M,
Yeah.
Kentucky, everything. So it's just the SEC is so loaded that you can get eaten up really quickly, I think. And, Tennessee's, like you guys have talked about it, this is a huge game to avoid that. And dropping 3 straight would not be good at all, of course. So
Hey,
this is a
I've
this is
got
a matchup.
I've got a question real quick, and it's non-Tennessee, Tennessee adjacent, I guess. And this is just kind of an SEC basketball thing I've been thinking about all week. Ryan, what do you think the reception is like in Lexington this weekend when John Calipari returns? And if you were a Kentucky fan, I saw this, this has been debated a lot on social media. If you were a Kentucky fan, what would you do? What would your, is this a situation where you say, hey, thanks for the memories? Or is this a situation where you said, you left us in the night for chicken nugget money? I'm going to boo. What do you kind of think will happen this week? And I think it's the fun storyline of the weekend off the court.
Well, I think they'll definitely boo. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think Kentucky fans should be extremely, extremely thankful that their wash coach left and they didn't have to pay him his $50 million or $30 million buyout, whatever it was. I don't think it was $50
Maybe they
million.
should cheer
It
just
was
for
a
that.
ton, though. So, I think it's almost an interesting case since Calipari has been so bad and Mark Pope has done such a good job in his first year.
You won the breakup.
I'm sure they'll boo this time and things will become more warm and friendly in the years to come. My guy Rick Pitino put out a comment.
I did see that
yesterday, telling him to cheer, even though he doesn't like John Calipari, to cheer for him. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Certainly, that game's lost a lot of luster with how bad Arkansas is.
Yes.
But you're right. That will be. Like I said, I'd be pretty surprised if people don't boo, but it'll be interesting to see just like how raucous the boos are and how thorough they are throughout the game when he's getting mad at officials and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, no doubt. Tennessee, Florida, 12 p.m. Eastern Time in TBAAFCC. Of course, follow along with Rocked Up Insiders coverage all game long. You can follow Ryan at rshump00. That's SCHUMP. You can follow Rick at Rick Butler. You can follow Rocked Up Insider at Rocked Up Insider. If you want to give me a follow, I'm at Jack Foster Media. Of course, stay up to date. All things basketball season, football off season. Baseball is 2 weeks away, ladies and gentlemen, from first pitch against Hofstra in Lindsey Nelson Stadium. Ryan and I will be having a full season preview coming out Monday, February 3rd. So just a couple of days away. It's going to be a long one and it's going to be a fun one, breaking down this whole Tennessee roster and looking at the biggest storylines heading into this season as Tennessee looks to defend its national championship. But for Ryan and Rick, I'm Jack. We'll see you next time.